So rolling rye in the upper Midwest, definitely a topic near and dear to my heart. So why move to no-till? And when we look about moving to no-till, there's a couple key reasons. One is a lot of what Jamie had talked about with respect to soil health, with respect to maintaining soil structure and enhancing soil aggregation, and also with maintaining those fungal communities, those mycorrhizal fungal communities that allow for expansion of the root system, allow for better aggregation. If we can reduce tillage and foster root systems that can support those mycorrhizal communities, we're going to allow for enhancement of that tool with respect to nutrient acquisition and water acquisition as well. The other is effective weed management. So this can be one of our stronger tools in organic to suppress weeds, particularly in one of the more challenging phases of weed control in organic rotations, the soybean phase. None of it's easy, but versus corn or winter cereal grains, soybean, from what I've experienced and what I've heard from farmers, is definitely one of the more challenging points in terms of weed management. So these are some organic yields off of our Wisconsin Integrated Cropping Systems Trial. So we call that the WICS, the Wisconsin Integrated Cropping Systems Trial. It's overall, I think, about a 30-year trial at this point. This data is showing 18 to 20-year means. But this trial has looked at impacts of different crop rotation strategies, continuous corn, organic corn, soybean, wheat rotation, and how that impacts yield, different soil quality parameters, weed populations. It's located about 20 miles north of here on a very rich prairie soil. So over that time, there has been an organic rotation consisting of corn, soybean, wheat. Depending on the year, there's been changes in whether that's red clover following wheat or berseem clover. But you can see, despite some of the criticisms we hear of organic, or the skepticism we hear about organic, yields can be very, very competitive, within 90, 95% or even greater of the conventional yields. And these have even continued to increase as some of our genetics have improved in both corn and soybeans, and as the agronomics have become more refined. So corn, conventional averages 174 bushel an acre, organic 166, soybean 52, conventional 47, organic, very good strong yields. So this is an average over a 20-year period. But if we hone down a little bit deeper in this area, or in this data, what we see is that in normal springs, so on the, I'm not sure how you got that pointer, Matt. The pointer, okay. In normal springs, those yields can be, again, very competitive. Where we do see yield lags in organic are wet springs. That could be for a couple different reasons. Wet springs, it may be difficult to get the stands that we want because we don't have the fungicide seed treatments, but a lot of that is due to the weed management aspect, that we aren't able to get out in the field in a timely manner to do our tine weeding, our rotary hoeing, our row cultivation, and that's when we see, whereas conventional phase of the rotation, this is soybean yields, we see at the two sites 48 and 57 bushels per acre. Organic, we see a significant yield drag. And again, that's due to the fact that we can't get out there and do timely weed management. So what the cover crop-based no-till, the rolled rye system does, it really eliminates the need for cultivation within that phase of the crop rotation. So it's not a complete no-till system in organic yet. We haven't reached that level where we can eliminate tillage completely, but it does focus on limiting tillage in certain phases. Here in the upper Midwest, the soybean phase is pretty reliable. I know there's a variation in farmer experiences across the region. I have not seen the corn phase work in a no-till situation. I certainly haven't given up, and I think there's a lot of ingenuity and creativity and innovation that we can apply both with respect to cover crop choice and mechanical management that may allow for this. I know Rodale seems to be able to do it. I just haven't seen it. I haven't seen it, and it certainly isn't consistent. Overall, the system is based on using a fall planted cover crop to smother weeds, and typically those are a winter cereal grain. So we're planting those in the fall. They're going dormant through the winter. They start to grow again this spring, and then we terminate those mechanically in the spring, either through roller, crimping, or mowing. Cash crops are then followed. You're planted, typically they've been following cover crop termination. We've been trying to bump up cash crop planting to get a longer growing season by planting directly into the cereal grain at the boot stage. Still trying to refine that system and see when there may be greater or less risk with that planting technique. And again, there's no or limited cultivation needed for weed control. So you're throwing out that variable in the system. You're not tied to the weather, you're not tied to the soil condition and your soil moisture. You're planting the beans, you crimp, you terminate, and then you don't get back into the field typically until you harvest. There's different roller crimpers that people have been using. We use the I&J model, and a lot of people do. That was developed by Rodale Institute and with some partners, some partnerships with others. The plans for this are on the Rodale website, so if you do have a local machine fabrication shop, you could download the blueprints and get that made. Can be front or rear mounted. The typical cover crops used in soybeans are, again, winter cereal grains. Winter rye tends to be the most reliable. It allows for adequate biomass. It has consistent winter hardiness in the region, and also has a greater degree of allelopathy. We've grown these various cereal grains side by side and crimped them, and even with similar biomass, winter rye consistently suppresses weeds better than the other cereal grains. We've tried triticale, and I know others have used triticale. Winter rye still seems to offer advantages. We are trying some winter wheat to crimp too, to try to see if that's a way to maybe mitigate issues with volunteer plants coming through with the next phase, depending on what the following crop rotation is. And legumes are still up in the air in terms of how to integrate those best. One of the issues with incorporating this in organic rotation is that it needs to be planted early. So there are limits to how to do this if the soybeans are following corn. And this is a photo that I got from a colleague, Stephen Mirsky at the USDA, and these are some photos that were in the Pennsylvania, the Mid-Atlantic region. And what he did was he planted rye for every 10 days or so over a 8-week period, from August 25th down to October 15th. So this climate is not too dissimilar to Wisconsin. Definitely a bit warmer, but still there's definitely some overlap with what we'd expect to see here. And you can see that planting earlier, these were ground cover taken on April 1st. There's two advantages. At first, we're going to more reliably get the biomass we need to make the system work. So we're typically aiming for about 8,000 pounds per acre. And planting earlier is going to more reliably allow us to be able to achieve that. And the other thing is we get better ground cover, which is going to help suppress early season weeds. So what we really want is something more similar to what we're seeing in the September 15th photo. And it can be challenging to try to get that rye planted by September 15th. What we do typically in our rotations is get it in after a early harvest of silage. So we try to plant an early maturing silage variety, come in, get that harvested, do some seedbed preparation, and get the rye planted. We've also done this after another cereal grain, so come in after a winter wheat crop, plant the winter rye. We've done it after alfalfa. I don't know if it's the best use of that nitrogen credit. I think terminating alfalfa, it's much better to put corn in there. But if you're doing corn for grain, it can be very, very challenging to get in early enough. I really would hate to see, at least in Wisconsin, it planted much beyond September 30th.
Have you done any aerial seeding?
I have not, and I would be really concerned. I mean, you have to be willing to accept the risk and be brutal, I think, in terms of assessing the spring biomass, because I think to get the consistency in rye biomass that you would need, aerial seeding, you're just not going to get the precision seeding and the reliability of germination. So whether or not aerial seeding is an option, I think if you're willing to say that I'll manage that as a green manure if I don't get the biomass in late April. But I wouldn't do it if this was something that you're really committed to doing. I just don't think you'd get the consistency in stand. So crimping must be performed at enthesis to ensure complete termination of the crop with no regrowth. And when enthesis, you're going to see the anthers coming off of the rye heads, and you're going to see pollen. And it actually can be an annoyance while you're managing the crop via crimping, because you'll see clouds of pollen come up as you're coming over the field. So that is absolutely critical, and you can go a bit later than that. You cannot go before that, or the rye is going to bounce back up, you're going to get regrowth, and you're going to get potentially viable seed that's going to carry over into the next crop phases. But again, we are, and Leah will talk about this, looking at trying to plant the soybeans prior to this stage, but still keep rye termination at the enthesis phase. This is a photo that Matt Ryan from Cornell shared with me. Again, just to stress the fact that you don't want to go in early and crimp. These were photos that Matt had taken on July 31st. So June 5th, that is spot on with what I see here in Wisconsin is when we would have our typical rye varieties reach enthesis. June 5th. So when he crimped on June 5th, New York is a very similar climate to where Matt is. You can see just the consistency and lack of regrowth in the rye cover crop. Earlier than that, the earlier you go, the more volunteer crop you're going to get. So you really want to wait till that date. Our rustic rye, we may get maybe 7 to 10 days advantage with crimping, but particularly if we can do some of these early planting models, I'm not convinced a rustic is necessarily a better choice with respect to rye variety. Soil to seed contact is one of the more difficult aspects of managing the system, and certainly something that merits some time, either in the winter with some equipment modifications, as well as you're planting to monitor to make sure that you do get good seed to soil contact, adjusting the seeding depth by adding weight. It's going to vary depending on cover crop biomass and soil moisture. And we're planning on doing more work looking at what are the best closing wheels in the system with ag engineer here at UW, Brian Luck. Higher planting rates tend to mitigate this issue, and even looking at the economics of the system, overall the yield gains you get with higher seeding rates offset the extra seed costs, and then you get extra weed management benefits as well. So we're typically going up to about 225,000 seeds per acre with soybean in the system.
Erin, have you done any tests of rolling rye after planting versus before planting?
Yeah, so the question was rolling rye after planting versus before planting. And the farmers that I've been working with and hearing stories of that are doing this on their farm, many of them are, even without going in and planting at the boot stage and planting within the green cover crop, or it's always planting within the green cover crop, but planting earlier, they'll, at enthesis, come in and plant first, and then that same day crimp the cover crop, and then they're not having to worry about slicing through that thick residue mat. I mean, the rationale for Rodale doing it in designing it so it could be fit on the tractor in front was that it would be a one-pass operation. So you're saving trips over the field, you're saving labor, you're saving fuel. So the issue with planting first is that you're going to have to make it a two-pass operation. So there's disadvantages there. But certainly I think you can get better seed to soil contact.
Are you planning on changing the closing wheels on the planter that you're using now to different closing wheels?
We're hoping to, yeah. So these are some photos. I should go back. This is July 15th. So you can see just great weed suppression. So there was, besides going in and doing the rye planting in the fall and then planting the beans in the spring, there's been no other passes to this field. One thing to note, though, which can be quite startling, is the beans are going to lag, and they're going to lag for a while. So don't get scared if you try this and you see the beans lagging. It's going to take probably, in my experience, until the first week of August, second week of August, and then you'll see a marked difference in terms of growth and canopy closure. And whether that's due to, we've done tissue testing, and to me, it's still inconclusive how much of that's due to nitrogen tie-up, as Matt was saying, from this high seed-to-end ratio cover crop, and how much of that may be delay in nodulation due to the cooler, wetter conditions under the mat. But certainly, every year that I've done this, I've seen a lag in growth, which can be startling if you're not expecting it. Mm-hmm.
2 questions. Are you using any row cleaners on the planter?
No.
And what was the planting date of that?
So the question was, are we using any row cleaners? No, we take the row cleaners off because we find that the rye wraps around that. But there's a lot of questions out there still in terms of what is the best equipment modification. And then what are the planting dates of this? So for this picture, this wasn't an early planted bean field. This was, my guess is the winter rye was planted. We were always trying to aim for September 15th to September 30th. So my guess is it's around September 15th. And the beans here, it would have been planted on June 4th, June 6th at anthesis. It is really consistent when we reach anthesis here in southern Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. Tim?
Erin, do you keep track of how much regrowth of the rye or whatever other cover crop percentage?
Yeah, so the question is percent of regrowth, and Leah had some data about that this year in each of the plot. It always looks really bad, but I think I remember from Leah's data, it was really negligible when we tried to calculate it over. But it definitely, so it's, in terms of regrowth, I don't think it ever, I've never seen it. If we're managing it at anthesis, and we still can get some regrowth, that it impacts yields. But I have heard issues with the following, that viable seed from the regrowth contaminating the following crop. So that's where you really have to know the tolerances of your market. Again, the importance of having those markets ahead of time and knowing what the specs are going to be in terms of quality. Because I would be really concerned about growing certain cereal grains after this, because I have heard that the rye contamination within the following cereal grain crop has had farmers have loads rejected. Mm-hmm.
Have you tried the no-till grain drill, narrow rows?
Yeah, no-till grain drill and narrow rows. I think theoretically it could work and close canopy better. I think that there's more equipment modifications that need to be done, and we really have to have adequate down pressure on each individual planting unit to slice through the rye. Whether or not that would work in an early planting situation, there's still a lot of different iterations that we could try to optimize, but the way we have been doing it, I think the grain drill, we lack pressure on individual row units to get through the rye, and we don't have the same precision seeding we need to really optimize the yields in this system. So I think any benefit of narrow row spacing is offset with the issues with getting the seed in the ground. Mm-hmm. There's tons of questions. I want to make sure, I'm going to shut off questions now and let Leah talk, because I always feel like I'm shortchanging when I'll be around the whole conference, and including, we can have a round table at the reception tonight if you guys really want to dig down deep into this. Another photo shows just really good weed suppression. This is later in the season. There's a few weeds popping up here, and this field happened to have I'm going to forget what weed it is. It's a bad one. No, not water. I don't see water hemp. No, it's the other bad one that stains soybeans. Nightshade. This field had nightshade, so we did see some nightshade popping through, but that just was this particular field had some nightshade. And again, my last slide before handing it over to Leah for the last half hour or so. Our yields across the years that we've been working on this. The first couple years, as we tried to get the system dialed in, get the equipment modified correctly, we did see more of a yield lag. The no-till beans, 30 bushel an acre, tilled beans, 47. But as we learn more about the system, optimize the various aspects, our yields could be quite competitive. 2011, right on par. 2012 was the only complete disaster with the rain shutting off at Arlington and around Memorial Day. The rye can still suck up some both until crimping and even after crimping. We do see it take up some soil moisture, which honestly, with how wet our springs have been, have not been a detrimental aspect of rye. And once it's terminated and is dead on the soil surface, it conserves soil moisture. And we have soil moisture measurements to document that, but it is an issue if for some reason, and I've heard that happen in Iowa this year with some organic no-till plots where there were certain areas of Iowa that were quite dry, and that can cause a challenge for the system. And unfortunately, by the time I think we realize that we might be in that weather pattern, it's hard to offer alternative management for the rye crop. But again, we're really getting very, very competitive yields, up to typically in the mid-40s to even 2016 was just a bumper crop for soybeans overall, but up to 60 bushel an acre. So it's really worked quite well for us. But I know it's not still without its challenges and questions that need to be answered. So with that, I'm going to hold off on questions, but I want to let Leah show the data that we collected. Leah has been working with me for, gosh, 2 years now, 2 seasons. This was her first year really managing this part of the trial, and she just did a phenomenal job really managing every aspect of the organic no-till rotation.